got a little thesis for you. Liberalism. That is classical liberalism, the philosophy, political philosophy of John Locke, James Madison, John Stuart Mill, Jürgen Habermas, John Rawls, and of course many others. But those are some big names. Those are the Beatles of classical liberalism, I guess. Classical liberalism is the ideology of oligarchy. I hope you find that provocative. Well, I mean, some people will just go like, yeah. And some people will be outraged, maybe. I don't know if I can still outrage anybody from my little perch. But, all right. Now, Karl Marx argued explicitly that, and many Marxists have echoed this, that liberalism, Lockean style liberalism, is the ideology of capitalism or of the bourgeoisie. Now, that's not insanely implausible. The liberalism arises. You don't find ancient liberals. You don't find medieval liberals. I mean, you can find little chunks of liberal thinking in Plato or especially Aristotle or wherever. But the thing we're talking about arises around the time capitalism arises in Europe, especially in England, and in part, liberalism fueled a series of quote unquote, if you're a Marxist, you think about it this way, bourgeois revolutions. The American Revolution, the French Revolution of 1789. All right. Those were revolutions that threw off the old feudal aristocracy and ended up resulting in some kind of capitalist economy. All right. And in classical liberalism, there is an advocacy of basically free markets, free exchanges. You find that in Locke in some form, definitely Adam Smith, who's a classical liberal, okay, etc. So, all right, so on the other hand, even if liberalism does arise in capitalism, and even if it is, sympathetic to capitalism in various ways or appropriate to capitalism in various ways, it might also be in tension. And even either way you look at it, the doctrine, let's say, of individual rights or of human equality, as articulated in the Declaration of Independence, echoing John Locke, for instance, might be beautiful and necessary and fundamental ideas. They are. Okay? So, hold on one second. I'm going to go turn off the heat so the furnace stops. All right, how about that for some amateur video making? Now, my claim that liberalism is the ideology of oligarchy is somewhat different. Okay? Capitalism could result in oligarchy, especially state-regulated capitalism or state capitalism, which is the economic phase that we're in right now, I say, state capitalism. Capitalism can lead to oligarchy. Other things can lead to oligarchy too. All right? Like if the ruling aristocracy is really focused on making sure all the wealth of the society rolls toward them, and many aristocracies have been, you end up with an oligarchy, really. I mean, I'm going to use the term oligarchy in a somewhat wider sense than its usual use. Since the ancient Greeks, oligarchy means rule by the rich. What I'm going to say the political ideology of liberalism does is it, in effect, assigns a much greater portion of all the goods, as described by Rawls, for example, in Theory of Justice: food, clothing, shelter, education, healthcare, opportunity, self-respect, okay, or the conditions of self-respect. Liberalism, in practical effect, makes the a hierarchy of goods, a hierarchy of people, and the people at the top of that hierarchy have access, far greater access to all the goods, and it gets more severe over time. That is, inequality increases, other things being equal. Now, other things aren't necessarily equal. And for one thing, like populist revolution can break out and shit like that, okay? Or populist politicians or whatever it might be can fuck up your democratic system a little bit. But okay, so liberalism starts with a declaration of human equality, or at least that's certainly one of the central doctrines. But it justifies a extreme hierarchy in the assignment of all goods, the distribution of all goods. For real. To the point where one thinks this is what it's for. Like that the declarations of equality, of egalitarianism, are not fully sincere, or so qualified are they in practice that they are betrayed. Okay, that we endorse equality, but we achieve hierarchy. Now, I've said things similar about all the left, really, actually, like the Marxist left, which is an absurd version of this in a way. Like, no, you can't have an egalitarian one-party state. You just created a great hierarchy, dude. Like, okay, you're not an egalitarian anymore when you go for one-party states and shit like that. Oh my God, man. You think Mao's an egalitarian? Look at the hierarchy he created, all right? In every fucking dimension. Now, liberals, though, it's a similar but a distinct problem. The basic, I guess, all right, egalitarianism and the idea that the legitimacy of government rests on the consent of the governed. The will of the people is the ultimate legitimating factor of the political system, the ultimate justificatory strategy for everything. This is the will of the people. And then this is the liberalism part, because you could go anywhere from there. You could go anarchist from there. You could go radically democratic from there. Okay, but in the liberal view, now the question is how to temper or ameliorate the democratic tendencies, the overly populist tendencies, the ignorance of the masses, in a situation where you've given them, the masses, the great majority of people or whatever, power in your first sentence, and then you suddenly realize, wow, these are ignorant, violent fuckwads, really. We just authorized, or potentially. So now we've got to figure out ways to ameliorate the popular will, to interpret it, to channel it into useful directions, to make sure it doesn't make terrifying mistakes of judgment and policy on a whim, or because a demagogue speaks up or whatever, in the classic Plato attack on democracy. So, and the U.S. Constitution is a good example of this. I think this is very classical liberal document. And, the Electoral College, the Senate, these are attempts to temper the direct democratic impulse into representative government and so on. All right. Unlike ancient Greek democracies where, the whole of the citizenry was the legislative body, officials chosen by lots so that people couldn't really accumulate power and stuff like this. That's not what we're dealing with here. So we set up really quite a activist large state to do all kinds of things, and we interpret the will of the people in this infiltration. Let's try that. Qualified. Right? Now, I mean, when Madison and Hamilton were writing about this, they were, in the Federalist Papers and about the U.S. Constitution, they were really, really concerned that the richest people were going to be in danger. And they were among the richest people. Okay. Not all the founders, were like the richest people in America, but some of them were. And what they worried about, and this is what Plato worried about too, is that they would just be dispossessed. Okay. Or people like them would be dispossessed. When they use the word minority, they mean the rich. Hamilton and Madison, basically. And when they use the word majority, they mean the poor, the average, the whatever, the farmers, the uneducated, etc. All right. So they created a system, and Hamilton was especially focused on this, where the wealth did, and this is a process that happened through the 19th century, where the wealth did, and I mean, it also coincides with the rise of capitalism, I guess, in the U.S., where vast personal fortunes became possible, okay? Where, I mean, the inequality of wealth in 1890 as opposed to in 1790 when the Constitution was written. If you said America was an oligarchy in 1890, you really would have had a point, wouldn't you? Like the golden moment of robber baron capitalism, which had been gathering for decades, really. Now, the Constitution helped make that possible in various ways. I mean, we could really try to do some history here, but it justified it ideologically in terms of free exchange and stuff like this, but it also made, and this is absolutely key to every giant fortune made in the U.S. in the 19th century relied on using and controlling the mechanisms of the state. Look at what Cornelius Vanderbilt did, for example, to get the railroads that he built across this country, all right? Commodore Vanderbilt. But this is true of everybody, man, of J.P. Morgan, of Rockefellers. They all used the mechanism of the state, which they were able to control in various ways through their wealth, to increase their wealth and their power until you had a period of robber baron capitalism, a period of oligarchy. And by the late 19th century, these are the most influential citizens in terms of the political system, that's for damn sure, in the U.S. So in that case, a liberal political system, I say, led directly to an oligarchy. Okay. Now, maybe it also tempered the oligarchy later on too. So that's kind of interesting. So I think this kind of thing happens. I mean, this is a historical reality, but it's a conceptual. It evidently follows directly from the conceptual structure of liberalism, man. That whole tempered, the whole large activist redistributive state. We're thinking classical liberalism as it developed, not in its kind of libertarian origins or whatever. Combined with an ideology of individual rights, leading to greater and greater inequality because the people who control the state control the wealth. Now, I'm just going to run through this. I've been doing this on all social media accounts and writing various essays. I guess this is my little thing right now. John Rawls. Rawls' theory of justice directly endorses oligarchy. I say, all right, like, I mean, not explicitly, he would deny it, but practically, straightforwardly, Rawls proposes to institute an oligarchy. I say. All right, so the people, all right, so I don't know how far back to go with Rawls. You know, Rawls in a theory of justice starts with a thought experiment. People deciding what sort of political system they want, or what sort of society they want to live in. Now, the problem with people deciding what society they want to live in is that they'll try to favor themselves in the design of their constitution or whatever. Like they'll if they're men, they'll want a male supremacist constitution, maybe. If they're if they're wealthy, they want to defend wealth. If they're poor, they want to, very active redistributive processes. If they are in a oppressed race, they want liberation, racial liberation. If they're an oppressor race, they want to continue the oppression. So what you do is you design people to design a political system. And this is how you do it. Make it so that people don't know. I mean, this is just a thought experiment, so you can say whatever you like. What would people do who didn't know where they were going to end up in the social structure? What kind of social structure would you want if you didn't know what position you were going to end up in at all? If you didn't know what your age is, what your religion is, what your race and sexuality are, etc., okay? Then you will have to come up with a system that's fair for everybody. All right. At any rate, this is what Rawls argues, and I think actually the arguments for as far as this goes are pretty plausible. Here's what they would come up with, he says. 2 principles of justice: equality in the distribution of goods, a presumption of equality in rights, liberties, and in the distribution of goods, except when, all right, actually the rights and liberties are to be distributed equally in an absolute way. But the goods, like food, clothing, shelter, wealth, opportunity, healthcare, education, etc., are to be distributed equally unless an unequal distribution helps the people lowest down. Right. Or in a later version, helps everybody, which is really not going to work out. But anyway, helps the people lowest down. Now that might seem unlikely. But inequality might be helpful to the whole economy. Some degree of inequality, not like we have now, maybe, might be help you get a productive economy. Like, in other words, like you incentivize industriousness and stuff like this. And so the industrious people make a little more money or whatever, okay? And that makes the whole economy more productive. And that helps everybody. There's more wealth, even more wealth to redistribute if necessary. Right? So, but that doesn't countenance a lot of inequality, right? Like, it doesn't seem to. All right. Now, here's the problem, and here's the problem of classical liberalism in a nutshell. Rawls allows you to really state it very, very clearly. The first good that they are distributing, when they exit their original position of not knowing anything, their veil of ignorance, and enter into their political system, the first good to be distributed, and Rawls affirms that this is a good, is political power. It's a fundamental good, because it's a precondition for lots of other goods. If you're completely stripped of political power, the civil rights movement tried to make this evident. All your goods are vulnerable. Right? You're not safe in your political participation. You're not safe in your educational opportunities. You're not safe in your health care. Not at all. Right? So the first thing we're going to do is distribute political power. And Rawls supposes, stipulates, we're going to form a state. A state, in the familiar definition, not that every word of this definition is necessary to make this argument, is a group of people operating a monopoly of force, a monopoly of coercion on the rest of the population. Weber's definition of a state. We could argue about that definition of a state. It's the only real plausible definition of a state, if you ask me. I would argue with David Graeber about this even. But anyway, so the original contractors are going to distribute virtually all the political power to that group of people who constitute the state and strip that good from virtually everybody else, from everybody else. I mean, virtually entirely strip that good from the rest of the population. Really, that's what they propose to do. Now, of course, Rawls is a liberal. He wants democratic political procedures. Everyone is going to participate in the political system in some way. Every citizen is going to participate in the political system and even have a say. Right? But understand, this is a classical liberal system, like the U.S. As a voter, you have 1 in 200 million. You have a 200 millionth influence. Okay. But what does the director of the CIA have? What does the director of the FBI have? What do FBI agents have? What do IRS agents have? What do prison guards have? What do, okay? They have much bigger quantum of political power. So this is an incredibly, it's not that they're actually stripping completely, entirely political power from people. They're giving them a tiny little quantum to each person and then gigantic amounts to this group. You know, call it 10% of the population or whatever it is. All right. Now, first of all, you can't, that's a complete violation of the principles of justice that Rawls has already articulated or that the people in the original position have agreed to. We distribute this good, and we distribute it completely, utterly unequally, like in dramatically unequally, obviously unequally. All right. So then the only question is, does this help the people who are disempowered? Basically, I think not. You're very likely to be a victim. You certainly cannot defend your own goods if this body of coercers wants to seize them. You know, you have no recourse, really. All right. I mean, I don't know, man. Like, we can think about what this really looks like in legal systems and stuff. This is what it really looks like in legal systems. And of course, officials are operating with impunity in all kinds of ways, all right? Like, police officers are authorized to do shit that if I started doing it, they'd arrest me for and toss me in the clank, all right? Like apprehending people, you know, handcuffing them, macing them and stuff. If I start doing shit like that, you know, driving around with my car and pulling people over and shit. All right. So first of all, the statist distribution of power is completely incompatible with the principles of justice, so they couldn't constitute a state, actually, from the original position. And second of all, state power, political power, is the power to distribute the other goods. That's the function of the state in Rawls' political philosophy, although he's notably reticent on matters like this. So, in the fullness of time, all disproportionate shares of every good will flow toward the people who control the government, or people like them, people that the people in the government wish well, members of their race, members of their gender, people from their region, people who went to their college. Right? Okay. And then you have a structural oligarchy where every good is concentrated hierarchically. That's not just something that happened in a classical liberal polity. That is the whole classical liberal idea, man. Or that follows directly from big state authority and with redistributive powers. Now, and an ideology of individual freedom or whatever, and equality, which begins to seem merely insincere when you look at the actual concrete results. So, I'm saying that Rawls rejects oligarchy in all forms, but his political philosophy encourages it, is it. If applied consistently, actually cannot be applied consistently. It cannot be, because you can't distribute political power that way in accordance with the principles of justice. But if you tried, you'd end up with an oligarchy in the sense of a severe hierarchy in the distribution of all goods. That's what classical liberalism is, because it's statist. What I would suggest is actually that Rawls' principles of justice are plausible, and they are obviously incompatible with the existence of the political state. So if you have any sympathy with Rawls' principles of justice, or if you like this procedure in the original position, then you have to start thinking about how we could achieve any of these results without doing it by coercive force. I'd say that'd be a lot more inspirational, man, and a lot less oppressive, and a lot more consistent with classical liberal professions. You can't have equality and a structure of coercion, and a society-wide structure of coercion. You just can't. Liberals. Rawls can, Habermas can't, Mill can't, no Kant. All right, that's it for today. I'll keep going with some form of this. Maybe I'll write some kind of book, I guess. I've written many essays along these lines already.